Hi, my name is Nora Gelprin. I'm the Director of Sexuality Education and Training. Thanks for joining me as we review managing students' values when teaching sexuality education. So, what are values? Those are really can be defined as the beliefs that form the framework for someone's decision making during their life. And we know when students are in adolescence, it's particularly important for them to identify what their own values are, separate from their families, to clarify their values, and then to have practice making decisions based on those values. Those are all really critical tasks of adolescence. Here are some examples of things that we all have values about in our lives. You can see how many of these show up in our sex education classrooms. We also know that students really need to be able to discuss their values because they can't make decisions based on their values unless they're really clear on what they believe and what their opinions are. So it's important to give them opportunity to discuss them. But it can be pretty different when we teach about values than when we teach about any other subject, particularly in sexuality education, because there's not an easy or objective right or wrong answer. This isn't something we could look up in a textbook. This isn't something that there's clarity on. Everyone really believes something different, and it's really informed by their life experience. There are such things as universal values, and that's really when the most of society agrees on something. Here are some examples of some universal values we've got here in the United States. You can see how these are things that we could really amplify as educators in the classroom because the vast majority of people agree with these kinds of statements. Versus these are the kinds of things where there wouldn't be universal agreement about. Some examples are when it's best to be married before having children, whether it's acceptable to have an abortion, whether it's acceptable to have sex with someone you don't love. Just some examples of non universal values. So, as you can imagine, most of the questions and the discussion that comes up in sex education classrooms are on things that there aren't universal agreement around, and that's when we want to use particular techniques to address those with our students. So here's how we can go ahead and do that, and just some tips to keep in mind. It's generally not helpful for us as educators to share what our values or beliefs are. That's not our role as an educator in the classroom. We know that's really the role of parents and families and caregivers to share what their values are based on their faith, their culture, their beliefs, their life experiences. We also know that as educators in schools, we need to make sure to foster a classroom of respect and tolerance and affirm that it's important for everyone to feel safe and comfortable expressing what their values are. There's a really helpful, quick three-step protocol that comes from the Seattle King County Department of Public Health. They wrote this in the Family Life and Sexual Health, the Flash curriculum. So I'll share it with you now because I found it to be incredibly helpful. When you get a question about values, it can really help to start by saying, some people believe, and then think about one end of the continuum of beliefs. Then you can go on and say, while other people believe, and share the other end of that continuum. And then the third and final step is to say what's really important is for you to decide what you believe about that topic and to encourage them to talk with a trusted adult. So let's do a little example real quick. What if you got this question? If someone is pregnant and doesn't want to be, is it okay if they have an abortion? So the way you use this technique is to start by saying, some people believe that it's never okay to have an abortion under any circumstances, showing one end of the continuum. And then other people believe that the decision about whether to have an abortion can only be made by the pregnant person, showing the other end of the continuum. And then to end by saying you need to decide what you think about abortion based on your own beliefs and values. And it can often help to talk with a parent or a trusted adult. Hopefully that feels helpful to you. Let's look at one other example. Is it okay for teens to have sex? So let's start by showing one end of the continuum about people that say no, you should wait until you're married or in a committed relationship. Other people believe that teenagers, under the right circumstances, can make that decision that's best for them, throwing in some important criteria for them to consider. And then lastly, you need to think about what you believe about this topic, and talking with a parent or a trusted adult can be really helpful. So hopefully that little three-step technique is helpful for you as you think about ways to address values-based questions in the classroom. There's some other ways that this can show up as well. We know that students often share their values during classroom discussions and activities. It's good to allow students to do this because they learn not only about their own beliefs, but when they hear those of their peers and fellow classmates as well. So really important to facilitate that discussion. Some ways you can do that includes acknowledging when you hear a value and distinguishing it from a fact. Also, to acknowledge that there's a wide range of beliefs or opinions about any of those topics that likely are coming up in your classroom. And lastly, to reinforce respect that when we hear other people's values or beliefs, that even when you might disagree with them, we need to do so in ways that communicate respect. So, to summarize, it's really important for students to be able to explore their own values developmentally. It's part of adolescence. It's important for them to do that in their classrooms with us. We know that everyone's entitled to their own values and beliefs, and that there are some pretty simple techniques that we as educators can use to try to manage these discussions and questions as they arise. So, hope that review has been helpful for you.